Hello, Bob.
Hey, Ben. Happy to be back for number 33.
It's great. I'm thinking I like talking to you because when I go off at a tangent, you run with me. And I've been feeling a bit low, and I think I feel low when there are big things going on and it makes me feel small and nobody comes with me. So I like to talk to someone where I can go off on any particular detail and they'll go with me, trusting that I'll bring it round to talk about the universal, which is the thing we have to agree with about in order to understand each other.
Exactly. In Eric McLuhan's thesis on Menippean satire, one of the main features of Menippean satire, or Veronian satire, is the digression. There's nothing but digressions in Finnegans Wake. You can even see Zappa's digression. This is a Menippean idea that we digress.
And how come every time I try and digress and talk off the top of my head and get away from the central subject, when I try and evade it completely, I always seem to hit spot on target your key obsessions? It's as if I can't avoid hitting the center of the target even when I'm shooting behind my head.
No, that's exactly it. I know with our attention we are on track. That's what's interesting. I have that faith. It's not even a faith anymore. I just know that the synchronicity will bring us back to the topic. So I'm a good listener that way. If you have a lot to say, I'll go with you.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. Although this distracting us from central disagreements that we should thrash out and either agree to go on talking or not? What about those?
Well, very good. I'll begin with this. Here's a quote from McLuhan 50 years ago, maybe 40. I don't know if this is the 50s or 60s. The quote is, a superstar today. So if he's saying the word superstar, that's really a 70s, or late 60s, early 70s word, right? I'm assuming. They might have said just star, but let's say this is 60s. He says, a superstar today is just another word for a sitting duck. Now there's a statement. I think that's an accurate statement. Your job is to respond to whether it's relevant. Does it fit into what you know? Is it something surprising? Remember, this is 40 years later. He said that when everybody was trying to be famous for 15 minutes.
I think it's a beautiful thing to say. I think expressing hostility towards the star system is the only point of entering it. That
is Lewis's manifesto, 1914, Enemy of the Stars. It's right there. McLuhan is the Lewisian.
That's a very interesting interpretation of Enemy of the Stars. It's never occurred to me. I've came across Enemy of the Stars as it's written in 1914. It's full of premonitions of war. It's a frightening piece of writing. It's a stage play with harsh light and broken statues and a kind of existential primitive drama with people with megaphones shouting at each other. I've always thought of it as lit by the most arc lights, and probably staged in some industrial backyard by a group of guerrilla avant-garde artists, And
yeah, I don't think they had the word star the way we mean it back then. I don't know. What do you think?
That's an interesting question. Would you like me to go and get my Oxford English Dictionary and we could look it up? I mean, if you were here and I was chatting with you, that's what I'd do, because it's sometimes.
Let's do it.
Okay, can you fill in while I go and get the book?
Yeah, a couple of other comments by McLuhan. A commercial society whose members are essentially ascetic, it's A-S-C-E-T-I-C, and indifferent in social ritual, has to be provided with blueprints and specifications for evoking the right tone for every occasion. I'll read that again. So he's talking about a visually biased society, a literate industrial society. A commercial society whose members are essentially ascetic, that means they don't engage all their senses, and indifferent in social ritual, has to be provided with blueprints and specifications for evoking the right tone for every occasion. So McLuhan's saying visually biased, literate society, industrial society, is not sensitive to nuance, to include the other senses. Are you back, Ben?
Yeah, I am. Stars, a huge entry in the Oxford English Dictionary. I'm talking about the second edition, volume 16. I'm looking at page 523. Isn't it great to invoke such old technology while we're Skyping? and celestial bodies in astrology, various figurative and simulative contexts. 1889, I suppose he was not reckoned among the stars of greater magnitude, but he was a very full light. See, in 1889, they're using it. Yeah, but it's not
as a celebrity.
Yeah.
Now, isn't that interesting? So by 1914, it can be used that way.
Yeah, and
it is not noticed. You're right. The content of the play would not make you think that way. But when you realize in Chaldermas that he's talking about, as McLuhan pointed out, the effect of movies and what Lewis called the angelization of mankind, the discarnate effect that movies and electric media bring in, and you can find elements in Blast, written the same year.
Well, it's going.
He's aware of the dynamics of the discarnate media. Let me just finish this.
Yeah.
And so, Enemy of the Stars is what he was all the way through his life.
Well, it's amazing that our common sense is to not credit current uses of words and not read them back. I mean, as an actor or singer of exceptional celebrity, their first example is 1779. The little stars who hid their diminished rays in Garrick's presence. And then
famous actor David Garrick.
Yeah, and then 1824, Carter was at a loss for a star in the pugilistic hemisphere to produce him a crowded house. Talking about finding a famous boxer.
Wow.
He had hitherto been speaking of what, in theatrical language, was called stars. So that's 1827 Edinburgh Journal. I mean, he's having to warn his readers about it. It's not really Edinburgh Weekly Journal terminology. It's not like now in the newspapers everybody knows what it means. It's theatrical language. He's having to say that. But there's the word. The great tragedy.
What's the first citation for the 20th century?
It's 1919, George Bernard Shaw in Anna Janska in Heartbreak House says, "You still want to be a circus star."
Okay, circus star, vaudeville star. So I think that the interpretation of Enemy of the Stars, that Lewis means that entertainment celebrities holds.
Yeah, because I always took it to be a kind of existential attack on reality itself. There are the stars, you can't touch them. I can't stand it because of that. But in a sense...
Yeah, you put it into the philosophy. You don't notice he's talking about the means of communication of his time. That's what's invisible. That's McLuhan's point. You're not naturally thinking of that. You know what I mean?
But if you also, to make the dialectical other point, you need to load in the idea of railing against what's fixed and you can't change to understand why a star is a sitting duck, why we should blow them out the water. Because with this philosophical understanding, you understand one's hostility towards people being called stars.
Yeah, so the...
Because,
the
I mean, if you... that leads you...
The characters in the play, are they reacting to the star phenomenon, therefore getting violent?
Well, we should do a reading of Enemy of the Stars on this show. We should take the different characters, because there's only a couple of them. I mean, Waiting for Godot is, in fact, a kind of imitation of Enemy of the Stars, so I don't think anybody ever says that in the...
Oh, no. Dennis Brown, a British critic, expert on Lewis and things, said he was... I think he's the originator of the idea of pointing out that Beckett was inspired by Lewis's Enemy of the Stars in Lewis's plays. That is not noticed.
Yeah.
And so, Beckett... Why would he go for Joyce? He was his secretary. He's going to go for the enemy just to have something to bounce off of. Beckett probably bounced Joyce off of Lewis in his mind. You know what I mean? So he had to model his stuff on Lewis and then react to that and create something.
And so when I'm feeling depressed, I reflect back into myself the generalized world picture of the newspapers, which makes you feel that you are not part of this star system which is overarching and beyond you, and therefore all the progressive acts that I do, anything that I do that I consider that I'm proud of, is always to smash that arrangement and try, and I am an enemy of the stars in that sense, and I think you are too, even though we a joke about how we'll do anything to get publicity, and we like the fact that when we're talking here we're going to put it on some tiny community radio station and we're going to stick it on archive.org, that we like reaching people. we're not prepared to play the game of the celestial system, which is only humans finding it interesting to look at other humans, in fact, but they project it onto the cosmos, and we find that absurd.
Yeah, we only want to become more well-known so we can insult more people, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Annoy more people.
Well, also because we'd like people to talk to us. I mean, I'm always waiting for the people to reply. That's really the interesting thing, is we're listening. I mean, Zappa makes that point, we're in it for the money. Do you know we're listening? And I always found that puzzling and intriguing, that a record that people should be singing, and they're obviously actually singing and you're listening, and he's saying, do you know we're listening?
Very good point.
But now I know what he means.
Let me say that.
Yeah.
Respond. Very good point about that. It's never been said before. I haven't heard anybody discuss it. I've thought about it, but never had a chance to respond about it. That is one of the characteristics of Menippean satire, is it looks at the audience and addresses them. And that's a definite an example of Menippean satire. You're like you're saying, we're not singing, we're listening to you.
Yeah.
We're studying the effects of what we're doing, our singing is doing on you.
Yeah, well, that is the interesting part, isn't it? I mean, if you do a performance, who wants to watch a video of yourself again, doing the performance? I mean, unless you want to refine a technique or out of vanity, it's nice to see yourself, I suppose. But what you really want is a film of the audience looking at you, their jaws dropping at how repulsive it should be that such a person should cavort in front of them. That's the really interesting part.
I just listened to the last half hour of your Dumitrescu special, and at the bottom of just going into the last half hour, there was a comment on how Dumitrescu was not interested in something, but in the effect. He was describing the effects of the present. That is the point. The artist, as McLuhan said, studies the effects of his work on you and of the society on you. That is the job of the artist, to study the effects. Any other thing is not an artistic activity.
Yeah, well, I was developing Andy Wilson's point. He was criticizing the composers around Pierre Boulez in Paris at IRCAM, the Institut pour Recherche. I can't remember the rest of it. It's a sound research institute under the Pompidou Centre in Paris, which Boulez used to be in charge of and set up. And they have the idea of an objective analysis of musical sound. And we were both complaining that they leave out your response to it, that we feel that when you hear a loud drum beat, you breathe in, and that intake of breath is part of the event that's happening when the drum is beaten. So if you spend your whole time using electronic instruments to analyze exactly how that sounds work, you're not analyzing exactly how that sounds work, because you're denying you yourself manipulating the instruments and hearing it. So we were saying we like the music of Iancu Dumitrescu, the Romanian composer, because it seems to include that listening gasp and that listening requirement and the tension of waiting during a silence that exists in the listener as part of the composition, as part of the research that he's involved in. That was a kind of footnote for listeners rather than a reply to what you're saying, Bob.
Yeah, I'm thinking of how Boulez are moving art into, or sound exploration, into the laboratory bias of the eye scientist. It's interesting. Scientists will say, well, we just create these things. It's up to you how they're used. They try to put themselves in a detached point. They did up to 20 years ago, into a ivory tower situation. We're going to create these wonderful new products. The effects is you guys deal with them. And it looks like Boulez, under the tactile, multi-sensuous 20th century, by the middle of the 20th century, had an identity crisis for the role of sound, so moved sound over into the eye scientific laboratory level, and made the mistake of becoming the eye bias, and missed the tactile nature of modern society, which is always studying the effects. That's what tactility means. You're interacting, and as we get into digital media, people have to interact more, and part of that effect in the 70s, 80s was people's concern with ecology, and so the scientists had to retreat, at least have to make better PR press releases about what they were doing. But the role of studying the effects has become something that a lot of the population is engaged in.
And
So
it
what
has,
is the role
yes,
of the William Lewis tradition to study the effects of people who are studying the effects caused by a digital society that makes you want to study the effects, therefore leaving the scientists marginalized and hiding in corporate
So, of course,
groups.
you'll accept the dialectical point against that, which is if you only study effects, and that means, for example, studying a film by giving out a questionnaire afterwards for all the people who went in and ticking boxes about how they felt about it, which a lot of market research does. I think we have to make
that's normally what's called efficient causality.
Yeah, and we have to come along and say, well, unless the person who made the questionnaire and asked the questions went to see the film themselves and has what they consider an objective or their own analysis of what the film is doing, you can't understand the answers to the questionnaire. That in order to map up the effects that things have on people, you need to have what you think is an objective grasp of the formal properties of the artwork, insofar as you can make it out. That you need that, otherwise you have no angle of vision to see what the effects are. I mean, to understand an effect, you must explore causes as well.
And you have to listen. When you go to a demonstration, you study the effects on the demonstration on people by engaging them and interacting with them.
Yeah,
and that was the quote while you were gone getting the dictionary. I don't know if you heard the quote, an old quote by McLuhan. He said, "A commercial society, that would be a literate industrial society, a class society, as Marx complained, a commercial society whose members are essentially ascetic, ascetic, kind of like Puritan, and indifferent in social ritual. That society has to be provided with blueprints and specifications for evoking the right tone for every occasion. They have no sense of the dialectical figure ground interactions with people."
So, provided that becomes a specialist activity in itself.
And we're well past that kind of society. That's why the establishment is in defense and running away, because so many people are reacting immediately to whatever's presented. And now that creates a lot of noise. And then nobody knows how to get past the noise of that to bring in some kind of removal of money or whatever agenda we Marxists want, right?
So,
we Marxists,
yeah. Well, I suppose I'm all for studying the effects, but I suppose I also want. I mean, what I mean is, I suppose I started thinking about these sorts of things with thinking about rock music. And I read Simon Frith's Sociology of Rock, which was a sociology of rock, which only studied the effects on young people of what rock music was doing. And nowhere did he step forward and say how the song was constructed or give any interesting musicological insights, because he couldn't do that, because he's only interested in the effects, and the young people consuming the music, he assumed, have no idea of its formal construction. Although if he actually had an idea of the formal construction of the music himself and then listened to the words used by pop fans, he'd have found that they've got a very perceptive ideas about how the music is constructed and whether it's efficient and whether it's powerful and whether it works and whether the bass line moves them and so on. And out of reaction to that sociology, let me finish. Can I just? Well, but I want to finish what I'm saying. Out of reaction to that sociology, I wanted an anchor. I want the equivalent of experiencing the music myself. And what I find in Marx is an understanding of what creates value, that labour creates value, that all the speculation and all the creation of the seeming creation of money that goes on can all be understood if you understand the exploitation of labour. And for me, that's the understanding of the real mechanisms that all the effects are coming from. And if you don't have that, then you lose your anchor and you get it completely at sea with what's going on, and you become as confused as the ruling class.
Okay, so the phrase you're saying Simon Frith studied the effects on young people. That's why the phrase "we are here to study the effects" is not effective anymore, because McLuhan noted that we had moved from the commercial society bias of needing blueprints and specifications for evoking the right tone for every occasion, where there is nothing but studying what the occasion needs. It's
That's
called,
right. Yeah.
Nielsen ratings.
And you get to a point where people talk about films. They never mention whether or not they actually like the film or whether it's worth going to see or a waste of time. But they say this is an interesting career move for this star to star in this film. So they're always appreciating the moves that these people are doing and commenting on them without coming to their own actual response. They leave that for something they say to a lover in bed or drinking with someone, or that's not part of the critical. I mean, it's funny. The actual critical part is not considered part of criticism. That criticism must be this showing that you understand how the system works and that it's all about effects, and therefore you leave out your own actual response to things.
Yeah, so studying the effects, the commercial society as defined by McLuhan has changed over the last 50 years. And now we are judging the right tone for every occasion. And now how do you provide an anti-environment to that? Is it becoming aesthetic and indifferent? That's the way it was when you were visually biased and industrial.
You see, I think it's by becoming greedy and personal and subjective and insistent on your right to aesthetic gratification. That's what sticks out like a sore thumb in current discourse. If you actually insist on your own right to have a good time, because everybody is saying, well, this is obviously very well suited to this part of the population, and I'm very politically correct, so obviously if they like it, that's good for them, and leaving themselves out of the picture. And I think that that you can't read what somebody says or listen to what somebody says and trust them unless you know what their base desires are. And I think,
So what we're proposing here is a way to be indifferent or to get around the constant monitoring of the effects of one's actions, commercially, media, personally. We are acting indifferent, and that's why I think we like someone like James McDougall, who acts with total indifference to the effects of normal rhetorical society that's studying the effects all the time.
Indifference would be a strange word to use of such an intense person. I mean, you wouldn't there. Someone like James McDougall is very angry and lustful and full of bile and laughter, and he's very intense. When you say indifferent, it sounds like someone who doesn't really care. And actually,
he doesn't care. That's what I mean. He doesn't care about the effect. The normal rules of effects that you should be cognizant of.
No, but he doesn't care about that, but he does seem to care a lot about what he's talking about. I mean,
and I would say what he's talking about probably is not effective.
Well,
you can't talk about the situation and be effective. You can only be... See, to be a James McDougall is the refuge of the helpless.
Well, this is the tragedy and helplessness of actual art, isn't it? I mean, art cannot...
the whole critique.
It's not marketing. It's not guessing whether or not your product is going to be consumed. It's doing what you do because you have to, because you really like it. And you make that mark, and maybe... a whole new society will hang its coat on that peg that you've driven into the wall, or they may not. And then, you have to take that risk.
And then you come back to what started this: the depression you had reading the newspaper. The depression that you experience is the depression McLuhan said was rampant in the 20th century. It's the fact that media environments, communication excess looks bigger than anybody's particular will. And now you can rebel against that and do all kinds of different aberrations.
Well, of course, there's been a lot.
That is the key to psychic health, how to see through that effect.
Well, there's been a lot done to flatter or to alleviate that problem with the creation of niche markets and Facebook and all kinds of
ways
of marketing that. Now, I suppose what I want to produce is a irritation with that, about knowing you're being strung along, that each time you're being made to feel slightly better, you're in fact being given a more refined suck of the big system, and that I want to do things and act in a way in which nobody is guessing what I like. I mean, Bob, do you respond like me when somebody says, hey, I've seen a movie, I know you'll like it? I bristle. I can't bear that because I don't want to know. I don't want anybody to know what I already like. I don't want to know what I already like. I like to know what I don't know. I want to be surprised. I don't want to be given something suited for me. It's exactly the things that don't suit me, which stretch me, which are interesting, which I want to wrestle with.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have the same reaction. Maybe most people do. I don't know. It's one sentence that is not interrupted and corrected. You probably never told somebody, hey, I don't want to know what you think I would like. And you can think you know that.
It's rude to do that.
It is a key point. It's rather rude, and you might break the social bonds by
because somebody is being generous to you. They're being friendly when they say that. That they know you'll like it. And I usually respond by saying, well, we'll see, or I'll try, or maybe you're right. We need to test this. Yeah. But
you do mean we'll see on another level. We'll see to give them the bypass, or the what's the phrase? Give them the doubt. But it is hard to resist because there is a generosity of feeling that comes through. Because maybe it's such an impersonal society, you're amazed if someone is even mentioning you.
But it's because of my yearning for the universal, which I used to feel slightly so bullied by postmodern notions that the universal is totalitarian and oppressive. I felt ashamed of. But now I'm convinced that without this striving towards universality, no one can actually have real conversations with anybody else, and that the imagination of the whole and of everything all at once is what drives everybody to communicate, to bother talking. That's the secret pressure for communication and for engaging with other people, is the idea of understanding everything and being free of any particular constraint. And then
politically to strike. See, it's interesting why we can't get the mass strike. Remember Lewis's book, The Apes of God, ends with the strike of 1926. All right.
Yeah.
So the strike is a great collective consensus, and there are strikes all over the place, but we never get the big strike. And the only way to overcome the celebrity machine is to have a massive strike.
Yeah, and
we know we can't get the massive strike, so that's why people feel deflated.
Well, one of the interesting things about being involved in revolutionary politics is that the party you're involved with will throw you into any strike that's going. That the philosophy of a revolutionary Marxist party is that during strikes, people come to consciousness of capitalism, you go and talk to them. And the very fact, however absurd you might think it is from the point of view of success, it's very interesting to throw yourself into discussions with strikers and to find out what's going on. I mean, the first things you have to say is you don't immediately find a fully formed revolutionary Marxist consciousness on the part of every striker as soon as you go along. But what I found really interesting was what happens when the rule of exchange of money is interrupted by the strike, the kind of extraordinary things that occur, and the feeling of directness that appears, which is immediately opposed by trade union officials and the official representatives of Labour. They don't like this happening at all. But the sudden feeling that we're just a group of people here, but we could go and ask for sympathy at that shop over the road and ask them to put our posters up in their window. That's a small thing. But then they say, well, they have a cousin who drives a van. They could go and park their van bang in the driveway where the vehicles with the people who are going to break the strike are coming in. Why don't we do that? And suddenly things like vehicles just become objects which people could drive there or put there or not put there. And all the reality that had seemed so boring and simply to do with, do you have enough money to buy this? And I can't go in that shop because I can go in this shop and that's where I buy this. All this sort of your alienation from all these particular things all breaks away, and objects and resources simply become what they are. A van is something you could park here or not park there. And when people suddenly come with cups of tea or because they support you, or people bring food or resources like if you're occupying the place, you need water. Suddenly all those things become absolutely concrete necessities which you move around and you control for your own reasons. I mean, you get a glimpse of it when there are squats and people start organising like that. But it's suddenly when the rule of money is interrupted, this different way of behaving occurs, and that is actually socialism. Socialism is not countries organised with atom bombs and armies and all the things that people think socialism is about because of Stalinism. This is socialism, this way of organising, and to their credit, and revolutionary Marxist parties have had a very hard time over the last few decades, and you get fairly ridiculous currencies in them and ridiculous people speaking for them and all sorts of absurdities in them. But this continually making you look at what happens during strikes is crucial. You really see a different way of behaving from then, and then all sorts of things that you read in Marx or in history come alive and you start to understand them, which is why it's necessary to involve yourself when those sort of things occur around you.
Yeah, so when I think of the intensity of that social interaction during a strike, is it because people faint at the idea of that intensity carrying on? And they feel, I need a break from that. I want to go back to my little private place and be by myself and don't have to run out and help the next bunch of people. Is that
I think
social fragmentation a result of literacy? Or is it not true at all that people could keep in a hyper state? Let's say the thing, like they tried to spread in '68, right? It started to spread, but then something stopped it. And Baudrillard said television stopped it. But what stopped it?
I'd say the French
people not.
I know exactly. Well,
in?
the French Communist Party stopped it. I mean, the French Communist Party hated the occupations of the students, and they especially hated workers and students talking to each other. And in fact, because they were all young and had long hair and were listening to rock music, they all had a lot in common, that there wasn't a great split, and there were far more working class kids were students then than there had ever been before, which is one reason why all those events happened. But then, you see, again, you come back to the necessity for a revolutionary socialist politics, in the sense that if you have the wrong politics on the part of the parties and the things that are meant to represent you, they can stuff your revolution. That's exactly what the French Communist Party did. The French Communist Party, which is, I mean, all Stalinist communist parties are right-wing and hate real socialism and sabotage it. But the French Communist Party in particular was one of the most extremely right-wing socialist organisations there's ever been. I mean, when Khrushchev did his speech in 1956 apologising for Stalin, they said it was a forgery and went on insisting that for 30 years. I mean, they were backwoodsmen of the most extraordinary kind. And this has totally distorted everybody's view of what socialism is, because all the stuff taught in universities happens to be written by French theorists who all have this experience of this right-wing organisation calling itself communist. So it's kind of what we are arguing has to work its way out of a mountain of bullshit.
Yeah, and there are many Trotskyists.
I mean, Bob and I, Bob, you and me are worms crawling, from under a mountain of bullshit.
Yes.
And this is Finnegans Wake. I mean, this is what Finnegans Wake is about. Activity in a midden heap. It's about literature as chickens picking over the dunghill, and this image is, well, it's how the Stalinists.
But it's not just industrial. It is language itself was part of the meaning of the midden heap.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was language, and then newer media. That is the piling on, and how. Even though creativity and language is a source of fun, it also is a big burden, big thing, a big dampening down of everything. That's the paradox of existence.
Well, I feel that Finnegans Wake is about judging words not on the conceptual weighing about what the logic of the words is saying, but of understanding the animal communication in the words. Yeah. And it's the way that you can understand when Wilhelm Reich talked about the emotional stink in a classroom. It doesn't matter what the teacher is actually saying, although if you go and uncode it and unwind it, you'll find it full of horrible stuff. But the very social relation between the teacher and the students, you can judge it. And when there's something reactionary going on, you can cut it like a knife. You know exactly what the emotional posture on the part. You can read it physically. You can see how they're standing and how the students are cowering. What the chemicals in the body are produced, the hormonal reactions that you have to certain turns of speech and certain power relations.
Right. And if you newspaper, that's a huge midden heap. That depresses you when you get intimidated by its size.
But it stimulates me if I act with it, which is the meaning of tearing. I had, one of the improvements during this holiday period. We're in the holiday period at the moment here in Britain, and playing with my children was we were doing paintings with poster paints, and we were using a newspaper to protect the table, and it got wet, and little Iris had some Pritt stick glue, and so we started actually taking things out of the newspaper and sticking them. And this is average childish or avant-garde practice, you collage with the materials to hand, but the fact is that it cheers you up, because all these things which are affecting you, which is the serried, even though media has exploded and things are in colour, actually all the pictures are kind of brown, and all the print is straight. It's in horizontal lines, all talking about the most tedious cultural bullshit, these particular pages that we had. And by tearing them, we could suddenly, Ray Davies and the Kings could be put vertically, striking into a blot of red, and all this stuff became things which we were playing with and moving around, and we started cheering up.
Right. Now, I'm interested in how to relate this to the strike, because McLuhan's media ecology, which was let's turn the TV environment off for 6 months, that was a kind of strike. Let's have a collective consensus. Now, I don't know if he could ever have gotten that consensus, and then he thought, well, maybe the quote fascist McLuhanites will do this to society if he had taken over the United Nations. So, but the point is, the strike is so important. All art is a strike on the sensory fossilized habits.
Well, I like the pun, but I'm challenged by the pun, because here am I doing quite a serious traditional socialist, support for the strike, and suddenly the strike is a hit, and something that strikes you, and and I think my favourite word for the strike is the wildcat strike, which is what the official trade union bureaucracy called the very effective strikes that workers did in Britain in the early 70s. They called them wildcat strikes because they're crazy. They're kind of like these bestial, feral creatures of strikers, and they were actually gaining their ends, but not according to the slow march to socialism being proposed by the trade union bureaucrats, who all then became lords and members of the House of Lords and members of the establishment. Wildcat strikes.
So when you engage in strikes and work with the Socialist Workers' Party there, you are hopefully toppling the leadership. That's what you're an infiltrator of it.
Absolutely. You're of the trade union bureaucracy in favour of the kind of socialism which people experience when they take action themselves. So we're kind of organised anarchists. Right. Is how you could call us. But the relationship between that and tearing pieces of newspaper and having fun in your kitchen with your kids and what modern art does, that relationship is one which I think is crucial, because if you leave it out, then if in order to win the strike you think you've got to produce a bulletin that looks like the newspaper and bores everybody and has the authority of the newspaper, you actually don't produce a revolutionary newspaper. And revolutionary newspapers have always exploded in the faces of their readers with new techniques. That's why the countercultural press with Oz magazine and so on was borrowing from the ideas of layout of 1917 and the Russian Revolution, that when revolutionary moments happen, it happens in every single space you can think of. and the earnest comrades who tell you that you've got to bottle down your modernist ideas because we need to win the revolution are nearly always arguing an authoritarian thing which corrupts their socialism.
Is there potential for a mass strike today in England?
I think there's always potential for mass strikes, although I'm not going to go out and expect one tomorrow if I call one. I mean, these are when you risk going on strike.
You need a bureaucracy to call one.
Yeah, you do need organisation and the trust of other people, and that's the turmoil that we're going through in Britain at the moment, because our large revolutionary organisation, the Socialist Workers' Party, is in crisis after its adventure with Respect, and nobody really knows which way to turn. But it's an interesting period because it's all fermenting and changing. And I'm watching what's happening. I'm not recommending any particular organisation at the moment. I've left the SWP myself.
Oh, when did you leave them?
I left them about 3 months ago.
Oh, really?
Formally.
After that
but I've
George
become.
guy?
Yeah, it was the fallout from that. The fallout from that made me think, well, I don't really know what I'm part of anymore. Let's see what happens. So.
Right, because your friends are just young people today. They're whoever in London. They are improvising. See, it's the revolution of every day, and how unrealistic or realistic that is compared to the larger industrial bureaucracy. I think humans are pretending that they're conformed in the present industrial, post-industrial societies, knowing it's all falling apart and saying, let's just keep pretending it's going and watch it fall apart. People are waiting for the anarchy, it seems. They want the anarchy to happen,
well, this is
they don't know when.
Yeah, but this is the kind of bizarre appeal of... did you see the posters for the film 2012, which has an abyss opening up? Well, it struck me very forcibly because they were changing the poster. I don't know if I've talked to you about this before, but they were changing a huge poster that exists over Waterloo Bridge around an iMac. You know, the iMac, the huge screen that they project things on. It took me ages to realise there was a cinema in there because the outside has been turned into a gigantic advertisement hoarding. So I always just thought it's an advertisement hoarding and sort of didn't connect it to the fact that there's a cinema in there, which is a word of warning to people who use obvious sites for ads, is that you forget what the site is really for. And they were changing ads from an ad for BlackBerry, the mobile internet thing. BlackBerry, you tell me, you probably know more people with BlackBerries than I do. It's quite a high-class kind of gizmo for connecting you with the internet, isn't it, and a mobile phone. And they were changing the BlackBerry phone for the 2012 apocalyptic scenario poster, which is a gigantic thing with a city and a great gulf opening up and buildings falling in, and it goes back, it's sort of like George Martin, who was a painter around the time of Blake, who used to do apocalyptic scenes. It's very popular at the time. And they were changing it, so it was sort of, I thought it was an ad for BlackBerry saying, you have been warned. And then this picture, I couldn't see how BlackBerry could be selling themselves on the basis of this apocalyptic vision. It really puzzled me. But then the advertising department weren't being quite as creative as I thought it was for this film. But the appeal of that film is surely for the feeling that... but isn't it, on the other hand, is that an appeal to people who want their orderly lives interrupted? Or is it simply spectacle and entertainment? It's something so absurd, so different from what I'm going to experience that I can go and watch it and not get worried.
Well, the Matrix aspect is they experience the anarchy, their brains do, in the movie. So then they can go back and have bland, conforming lives because they get released from the experience for 2 hours of the movie. See, that siphons off the frustrated energies. And that's another reason why. I mean, that was partly what Baudrillard was getting at when television and de Gaulle's statement stopped the revolution. It may not have been the whole factor. The Communist Party was part of it. But there is this fact that ongoing frustration is being alleviated by the medicinal effects of the entertainment utopia.
Yeah, which is why the special art we're keen on actually inoculates people against and reverses the effects of that amelioration.
Right, but I think that I do not, when I listen to your show, Out to Lunch, I enjoy it, but I recognize it as just filling in a tone, an ambience that I vibrate with. But I don't see that. I don't need that. I don't want it to solve my problems. It's a respite. So I'm actually using your obscure show for the same reason masses will use 2012 to siphon off frustration or filling in the gap.
Well, I'm torn in two ways, because I love watching new technology at work in expensive films. I'll go along and watch that because I'm really interested in how are they doing it, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it as much as anybody else. I am mass man. I'm not somebody who stands above and says you shouldn't go to a film like that and it's very bad and so on. But I do think that having experienced Finnegans Wake and Frank Zappa, there's something that they give me that is not being given there, which gives me a slightly wry view of it. I have an idea that you could do something else or more. And I think
isn't that a kind of snobbery? I've been somewhere the masses haven't been.
Well, I don't think the masses are defined by one particular film that we all go and see. I mean,
no.
People.
I'm saying that the very things we're talking about, Zappa, Joyce, McLuhan, Marx, and Finnegans Wake, are so esoteric.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, maybe you're too sophisticated to appreciate my radio programming in the sense that it.
No, I say I like it.
Yeah,
but looking at it saying, well, why do I need this? It's the same siphoning as the 2012 will do for people.
Yeah, well, my idea would be to create radio and sound that we're doing now, which talks about this issue, and therefore ask other people to give us their comments about where they stand on it. I mean, I'm listening out for the people who might hear us. And you do that to the full stretch of what you can do. I mean, when you have producers and you work for the BBC, you have other people over you who have very strong ideas about whether it's good or bad to mention this or do that or do the other. The advantage of these very community radio is that nobody's overseeing what we're saying to each other now with a view to it going out. We're allowed to talk freely. So my idea would be that by honestly debating the limits of what we do, we might find other people who can join in the discussion, and that's all really one can do, because what else can you do with talking except talk to people?
I'm not just working towards a discussion. I'm trying to create a strike.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to create a strike too, but
we don't know what a strike is anymore.
Well,
it's so vulnerable to the institutions hijacking it. So I'm actually looking for something that cannot be stated.
Yes.
And yet I do interact with people who are living in the middle of a strike, the undefinable strike. Interacting with you is like interacting with the strikers.
Well, yeah.
But we could say what we're striking. You to say, look, let's just get rid of money. That's the point of your writing. You say, look, why are we going to work? Why are we earning money? That is why you fall back on Marx. That's your agenda. Get rid of this money thing.
Yeah, but I don't want to starve, so I'm not saying get rid of my house and my, I recognize I need to live.
What are we doing if you are willing to take that sacrifice?
I'm insisting...
you might have to go live somewhere else.
I'm insisting that this capitalist activity on the part of everybody who's involved with it, both bosses and workers, is creating the possibility of something else, and that this is arising. And that
you see something coming over the horizon.
Well, no, I think it's born every time there is resistance, and born every time one. Well, it's ever present. It's everywhere. I mean, in this sense, I agree with you. I do think it's pervasive. Articulating it and organising it into something which is the task that faces us.
Yeah, so we're in a global strike that's happening all over the place, and people are dropping into it and dropping out. And we're in the middle of this strike looking for others who talk our language in interpreting the strike and where it's going.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing here? We're looking for...
Although, I suppose I think I see fellow spirits divided in different realms, so that I have a lot of sympathy for the revolutionary socialist point of view, but then I have a lot of sympathy for people who, for aesthetic reasons, will not enter into politics, who consider politics a kind of dreadful area of logical dispute, and prefer a more direct thing.
There are obvious contradictions there. And
yeah. Well, but the contradiction isn't in me. But Bob, the contradiction. No, but you see, the contradiction.
You're helping explain what quadrophenia is.
But the contradiction isn't in me. It's in the social totality that has these conflicts in it. I mean, I appreciate these different aspects of what I consider to be attacks on capitalism, but a lot of the people locked into that don't appreciate that the other people are suffering under the same thing. I mean, for 20 years in the town I was in, I was going to music upstairs in pubs, I was going to politics upstairs in pubs, but none of those two lots of people ever talked to each other. I was the only one who went between, who did both. The people who went to the politics would go to, something a lot more. They wouldn't go to music upstairs in a pub. They think that'd be grubby and difficult and weird, And similarly, the people who went along to the music upstairs in pubs couldn't go along to the politics upstairs in pubs, because what they were doing was the central thing, and it was music. And what do I want to bother with politics for? And so this is frustrating to the reflective mind.
Evoke the right tone for every occasion, or actually the non-right tone for every occasion, to move on to other parts of yourselves.
That's it. I mean, it's trying to create connections or to mine holes between the separations that are erected between these different aspects of our lives, and to live totally.
So you evoke the right tone for every occasion. When you meet an aesthete who won't go to politics, you tune into them. I won't say you study the effects of them, maybe you do, but you do vibrate with them and put them on for a while and agree with their reality and celebrate their view. Then you drop that person and go to a political place and you interact with the tone for that occasion or situation.
Well, no, I hope I don't just camouflage myself in any situation I'm in and become like it. My idea is to produce a contribution
that means that you are never what you are involved in.
No, I'm never comfortable.
Indifferent.
No, well, indifferent sounds like I don't care about it. You see, it's not the right word for me.
You don't care about staying in that one situation. You move to the pub, you go to the other place.
Well, I don't evade it, I want to move it on. So generally I make a mark on it, which I hope could be a crack in it, so that the division between those two activities could be overcome. I go around making holes.
That's right. And I'm saying because
I'm holistic. I'm properly holistic.
You don't stay around and pick up the mess. You don't stay around and stay focused in that situation and help the people through the mess you made for them. You might stay around a little bit, but then you go to another place. In other words, you're all over the place, Ben.
Well, this is my activity, but I think in my reflection on it, and in my more, when I'm not out tripping over these. I mean, it's not like I do it on purpose. This is something I found I can't help doing, because I find I think it's these divisions between things that keeps everybody separate and not understanding the situation we're all in.
Right, and so I bring in, there's nobody as diverse as me. You have one wall. You will not handle what you call the New Age ion. Engage ion. You got a block on that point.
Well, I've tried. I mean, there's not many people who spent an hour talking to him in the world. I mean, I must be, quite privileged, quite a small percentage of the world's population. I have spent an hour talking to him, Bob, so I'm, in terms of most people's perception, I'm an expert on ion. I mean, I haven't spent 1,000 hours talking to him, but proportionally,
because you couldn't take it, and you moved on. I'm just saying that we have boundaries. If we have a strike, it's your boundaries. Well, I want to go back home after a while. It's the constant making of boundaries that allows a hierarchy to show up, and the boundaries are really getting fluid now. Nobody knows what the boundaries are, so they make identity images.
I think this is the most flatulent of your arguments, Bob. This is the one you fall back on. It's a bit like talking to someone who has some sort of cheap Zen Buddhist trick in them, that when you get into a corner, what you invoke is, I am limited because I
try to put me in a corner. I put you in the corner. You claim I'm in the corner.
Well, yeah, but the problem is the room that we're in isn't even square. It's like this pointed oval, and we're each in a corner, and there's just a curved space. It's like that place that Zappa built in his house, that was for echo possibilities, and you looked up at it as a massive chimney with and you're at one corner, I'm at the other corner, but it's just amplifying our voices.
We're like the two people in Enemy of the Stars, the two protagonists in Enemy of the Stars.
We're the real
right?
thing. I mean, the Enemy of the Stars was a bit of literature about us, but we're it. And that is, Bob, that's where we've got to stop. We've run out of time.
What, time?
Yeah, time. Do you remember that?
Is it over?
Yeah, I know, it's a con, but it's happening. That's over. Thanks a lot, Bob.
I wasn't leaking. I thought, I want to get back to that point.